What is up, guys? Kellen back here with Inside Out Precision, and today we're going to talk about something that I get asked about all the time, which is when shooting long range, so generally like 80 yards and out, how do I still center my sight housing in my peep sight without changing or dropping my anchor point? So if you aren't familiar with this phenomenon, basically what happens is, especially on a single pin sight, so like this is the Fast Eddie XL, when I need to shoot a longer range, I roll my sight down and this housing drops, obviously, so I can raise my bow up to shoot further. Now the problem is, once I get out past about 65 yards, if I just anchor totally normally and look through my peep sight, I'm only seeing about the top half of my sight, and that's because it has dropped so far that when I line up in my normal anchor position, my scope is sitting so much lower, or my sight is sitting so much lower, that I'm only seeing the top half of it. So rather than dropping my anchor and having a floating anchor to see through it, and this is especially true if you're shooting like 80, 90, 100, or even further, rather than moving my anchor point, there's actually a pretty simple trick that you can do to eliminate that. So basically what we're going to do is set our peep height at about 50 or 60 yards. So most of the time when you go get fitted for your bow, you're shooting at a range and maybe you're shooting 10 or 20 yards. So you sight, you set your sight at 20 yards, you draw back, they set your peep sight so that it's perfectly centered at 20 yards. Well, usually you're shooting further than 20 yards, unless it's just an indoor setup where all you're doing is shooting 20. Most of my shots on like a 3D or field course are going to be somewhere in that like 35 to 55 yard range. So what I like to do is set my peep sight at 20 yards, get sighted in with it right at 20 yards. Then I go out and I shoot. I do it at 60 yards. So I go out to 60. I sight in to where I'm hitting at 60, and then most likely you're going to notice that it feels like, at 60 yards, like you're just getting to that point where you feel like it's kind of hard to see your whole housing. It's dropped a little bit. So I actually will move my peep sight down to where when I'm, anchored at 60 yards, my sight housing is perfectly centered in my peep sight. Now, what that will cause is, at closer ranges like 20, you might feel like you have to, get a little tighter on your anchor here, or bury just a little bit more than you might usually if you set your peep height at 20 yards. But again, I'm kind of adjusting to my average distance. So for me, setting my peep height at 60 yards allows me to, at 80, 90, and 100, I don't feel like I'm, having to drop my anchor and look up, basically to see my sight. Conversely, at 20 yards, yeah, I'm a little more solid in my anchor, but I'm not like smashing into the string. I can still get a full sight picture without having to, put a lot of face pressure on the string. So I wouldn't recommend doing this much past about 60 yards. Like if I set my peep height so that I'm hitting, or that it's perfectly centered at 80 or 100, when I go to 20 yards, I'm gonna have to bury and push my nose down so hard on the string to get a good sight picture that it's gonna cause face pressure issues and most likely cause, flight issues with my arrow. Now, I know there's probably a lot of people out there that say, oh, well, you can just drop your anchor, it's not a big deal. And if that works for you, that's fine. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it. You will notice, like let's say I'm setting it at 60 yards. So I'm sighted in at 60, but my peep height seems a little bit high, so I drop my peep height. You are gonna have to move your sight down a little bit in order to still hit at 60, because if I lower my peep height, it lowers my point of impact. But it's not gonna have to drop so much that I keep having to move my peep sight to see my housing. So this is kind of something that I think Levi Morgan actually mentioned this a long time ago, just kind of in passing in one of his videos. I learned this just kind of by trial and error, to be honest. And then, that girl Maya that I coach in USA Archery, everything is shot at 55 yards. So we always set her peep height on her outdoor bow for 55 yards, so that when she comes back and just anchors nice and solid, her scope is perfectly centered in her housing. So like I said, I'm sure there's other ways to do it, but this is what I have found works best. I kind of set my peep height at a little bit longer range than my average range of shooting is going to be, and that way when I'm shooting 80 or 90, I can still see it just fine. If I'm shooting 20 or 30, you know, I have a little more, I have to bury a little bit into it to see through it, but not so much that I'm actually putting a ton of pressure on the string. Now when you see guys that are shooting 160, 180 yards, they've done something special to their bow. Usually they raise their peep sight way up, this hand is dropped. It's very hard to get that much range out of your sight without, you know, your housing running in to your arrow, or your fletching, you know, your vanes when you shoot. So anyway, I thought I'd just make this video because I get this question asked to me all the time in the comment section here. And like I said, it's pretty simple. Obviously, if your peep is tied in, you're going to need to cut your peep sight loose. Be very careful when doing so. And then as I move it down the string, it's probably going to, well, it is going to rotate a little bit one way or the other. So you might need to take or add a twist, you know, in or out of your string, or a half twist to get that to realign, and then realign your string loops, and everything's nice and square at full draw. But for me, it's well worth the little bit of extra time that it takes, because, you know, if I have an 80-yard shot in practice, I don't want to feel like I have to, you know, do this to see through my peep sight, or drop this hand and have a floating anchor in order to get a good sight picture. So if you have any more questions on this, obviously feel free to hit that comment section below, or you can Instagram, you know, DM us on Instagram. I'm really trying to keep up with all the messages, but I probably get close to 100 a day now, and lots of times, you know, if it's a really involved question with arrow spine and tuning and all that, I don't have enough time to basically, you know, write 7 paragraphs on dynamic spine and tuning. So I apologize if I don't get back to you on that. What you can do is call the Bow Rack where I work in Springfield, Oregon. You can look their number up on Google, and you know, this time of year we're absolutely buried, so I may not be able to spend 20 minutes on the phone with you right away, but I can get your name and number and call you back at a time that's more convenient for you, and we can chat. So again, work at the Bow Rack in Springfield, Oregon. You can, you know, look at our website, give us a call, and hopefully we can, you know, figure out whatever issues you may be having. So anyway, thanks for watching this video. Hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. It really helps us out. And until next time, keep them in the middle. Remember, precision is a decision, and I'll see you on the range.